In the year 2035, America lay in ruins. The zombie apocalypse had ravaged the country for over 2 years. What was once a bustling superpower had turned into a ghost town, with only small pockets of survivors clinging to life. The undead horde had wiped out entire cities, but the survivors, those who managed to escape the initial wave, believed they had won the war. Or at least, that's what they thought. Life had returned to a fragile semblance of normality. Survivors worked together to rebuild, scavenging the remains of the old world, establishing small communities, and learning to survive in a world that had been reshaped. They fortified their homes, set up watch stations, and held tight to the hope that perhaps the undead had finally been vanquished. The quiet moments felt almost surreal, as if they had found a new sense of peace amidst the chaos. But as the days went on, strange things began to happen. Small sightings of figures stumbling in the distance, faint growls echoing at night, and strange noises in the wind. It was almost as if the undead were watching them. In a small community nestled within the remains of a destroyed city, a group of survivors lived in a makeshift compound, surrounded by barbed wire fences, and guarded by a handful of the most experienced former soldiers. Among them was Maya, a young woman whose family had been lost in the early days of the outbreak, and Robert, a former military strategist who had taken charge of the settlement's security. Together, they represented the remaining hope that the world could be rebuilt. Maya had lost everything, but in Robert, she found a sense of purpose. They had developed a close bond, leading the small group with discipline and courage. Despite everything they'd been through, they believed that peace had finally come. But, as the days passed, Maya's instincts began to betray her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One late afternoon, as Maya walked the perimeter of the compound, she spotted something unusual in the distance. At first, it looked like the movement of shadows, but as her eyes adjusted, she realized it was a figure, no, several figures, staggering slowly towards them. Panic began to rise in her chest, but she quickly controlled it. She had to stay calm. "Robert," she called, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. The veteran leader came quickly, his sharp eyes already scanning the horizon. "What is it?" "There are figures moving out there," she said, pointing to the distance. "I don't know what they are, but they don't look right." Robert squinted, scanning the horizon for a moment before turning back to Maya. "It could be survivors," he said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his doubts. The two of them climbed the watchtower to get a better view, Maya's heart racing. What if they had missed something? What if the undead had never really gone away, only been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to strike? Robert, with his years of experience, didn't take any chances. "Get the others," he ordered, his voice low but authoritative. "We're not taking any risks." Maya quickly descended the ladder and raced to gather the group, her mind working quickly as she replayed the last few days in her head. Had there been any signs of the undead coming back? Any strange behavior? There had been reports of food going missing, strange noises at night, but no one had thought to connect them. Could it all be tied together? As the survivors assembled near the watchtower, Robert addressed the group. "Listen up, we may have a problem. Keep your weapons ready. We're going to investigate, but we're not making any assumptions. Stay sharp." The group, already tense from the possibility of new threats, nodded in agreement. Maya could see the worry in their faces. No one was ready to face the horrors of the undead again, not after everything they had already endured. They moved cautiously toward the area where Maya had seen the figures, but as they got closer, the group began to notice the smell, an unmistakable, putrid scent of decay. The hairs on the back of Maya's neck stood up. Her gut told her what she already feared: the undead were back. And this time, they were different. Just as the group reached the spot, a loud scream echoed through the air, sending chills down their spines. It came from the direction of the settlement. Without hesitation, Robert ordered the group to move fast. "Go! Now!" The survivors ran back toward the compound, but Maya couldn't shake the thought, this wasn't just a few stragglers. This was something worse. The undead were adapting. And they were coming back stronger than ever. End of Part 1. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with the next part, or if you'd like any adjustments. The survivors rushed back to the compound, adrenaline surging through their veins. Every instinct screamed at them to act quickly, but Maya's thoughts were scattered, her mind racing with one terrifying question: what if the undead had evolved? As they neared the gates of their small fortress, Maya heard the sound of the distant groans and stumbling feet. Her heart pounded. They were close. She could see the guards already in motion, preparing for an attack. Robert motioned for the group to hold back as he led the way to the watchtower. The air was heavy with tension. Maya climbed up the ladder, her heart racing. Once she reached the top, she immediately scanned the horizon. The figures from earlier had gotten closer. The shapes were unmistakably human, but something about them felt wrong. They weren't shambling like the usual undead, they moved with a coordinated, unsettling precision. That's not normal, Maya muttered under her breath. Robert joined her at the top, squinting into the distance. We need to be sure, he said grimly. Get everyone inside the walls, now. No exceptions. The signal was given, and the survivors rushed to retreat behind the compound's fortified gates. The sound of the approaching figures grew louder, a slow, ominous rhythm that made Maya's blood run cold. This wasn't just a few straggler zombies. No, this was something much worse. Robert turned to the group, his face stern and focused. Everyone, stay calm. Get into position and be ready for anything. We've got a feeling this won't be like the attacks before. As the survivors took their positions, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. From the moment the first undead appeared in the distance, the atmosphere had shifted. It was as if something in the world had changed, an unsettling quiet had fallen over the ruins of the city, as if the land itself held its breath. Maya descended from the watchtower, her thoughts clouded. She wanted to reach out to someone, anyone, to explain the uneasy feeling that was gnawing at her. But no one had an answer. The undead, for all their mindlessness, had been predictable in the past. They were slow, disorganized, easy to fight off if you had the right strategy. But these creatures, these new figures seemed different. They're here, Robert's voice interrupted her thoughts. Looking up, Maya saw them, close now, far too close. The figures that had once seemed far off were now upon them. But they weren't moving like the mindless undead she had known. They walked with purpose, their movements synchronized. They weren't in a state of pure decay, either. Their skin wasn't just rotting away, it seemed to be regenerating. Faint hints of color returned to their faces as if the infection was evolving, mutating into something new. Their eyes glowed a faint yellow, not the dull, dead pupils typical of the undead. One of the figures, an older man, staggered toward the gate. His mouth was twisted into something resembling a grin, though it lacked any sign of humanity. He moved with an eerie precision, not a stumble in sight. He raised his hand, signaling the others to halt. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Robert, what do we do? This isn't like anything we've faced. Robert looked down at the weapon in his hand, his knuckles tight around the hilt of his sword. We fight, he said simply. We have no choice. The survivors huddled together in silence, eyes trained on the approaching threat. A part of Maya wanted to believe that Robert was wrong, that they could somehow wait this out. But deep down, she knew. The peace they had worked so hard to rebuild had been shattered. The undead were no longer just a mindless horde, they had evolved. And now, they had learned to adapt. As the first undead figure reached the gate, it stopped. The others stood in place, waiting for something, or perhaps for a signal. Maya's pulse quickened. She could feel it, the tension in the air. It was as though a challenge had been issued, and they were waiting for the first move. Robert's hand gripped his sword tighter, his jaw set. Ready yourselves, he murmured to the group. We're not letting them in without a fight. The undead didn't move, but they didn't need to. The silence between the two groups felt like the calm before a storm. Maya's mind raced. Had the zombies somehow learned? Was this the result of a new mutation, or was it something far worse? Before she could process any more of the thoughts swirling in her head, the quiet was shattered by a loud bang. A shot rang out from one of the watchtower guards, the bullet whizzing past one of the undead figures. The shot was followed by a low growl, and then the undead moved, no longer in a slow shuffle, but at a startling pace. They charged forward, their eyes locked on the gates. Maya didn't wait for orders. She grabbed her weapon and ran to the nearest barricade, feeling the weight of the past 2 years come crashing down upon her. The war was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. And now, they were facing an enemy unlike any they had seen before. One that was smarter, faster, and more dangerous than ever. The undead had evolved. And they were ready for war. End of Part 2. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with Part 3, or if you'd like any changes. The undead surged forward, their grotesque forms moving with a speed and coordination that sent shockwaves through the survivors. It wasn't the usual slow shuffle they had grown accustomed to. These creatures moved with purpose, their yellow eyes gleaming with a strange intelligence that felt almost deliberate. Maya's heart raced as she positioned herself behind the barricades, her hands shaking as she gripped her weapon tightly. "Hold your ground." Robert's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the chaos. "Don't let them breach the gates." The first wave of undead slammed into the fortified walls, but the barricades held firm, reinforced with everything the survivors had scavenged over the last few months. The metallic clang of the undead's fists against the barricades echoed through the compound, but it wasn't enough to break through. For a moment, the survivors caught their breath. But the undead were persistent. Maya's mind raced. These weren't the same mindless creatures they had fought in the past. They weren't just driven by hunger, they were driven by something else. Something far more dangerous. As the first group of undead battered against the gates, another group appeared, creeping from the shadows like a silent wave. "Robert!" Maya called out, her voice sharp with panic. "There's more of them." Robert's eyes narrowed as he turned to survey the area. More figures were emerging from the surrounding rubble, their bodies twisted and distorted, but with an eerie coordination. The way they moved in sync, as though they were part of a larger, unified force, was unnerving. "They're surrounding us." Robert growled. "Get to the walls. Move, now." The survivors scrambled into position, their eyes darting from one side of the compound to the other, searching for weak spots, places where the undead might break through. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat as the full scale of the threat began to sink in. There were so many of them, far more than she had originally thought. It was almost as if the undead had learned to organize themselves, coordinating their movements and attacks with precision. From behind her, Maya heard the loud bang of another shot, followed by a scream. She whirled around, her heart sinking as she saw one of the survivors, a young man named Jacob, stumbling backwards, clutching at his leg. His body jerked violently, and in an instant, his eyes glazed over. The infection had spread too quickly. He was already turning. "Jacob!" Maya shouted, running towards him. But it was too late. In a moment of desperate instinct, Robert was at her side, pulling her away. "We don't have time," he barked, his eyes wild with urgency. "We need to hold this wall. The undead are getting smarter. We can't afford to lose anyone else." Maya looked back at Jacob, the image of his vacant, lifeless eyes seared into her memory. This was no longer just a fight for survival, it was a battle for the very future of humanity. The undead outside were relentless. They pounded at the gates, their strength growing with each attack, as though they were trying to force their way inside with an unholy determination. Maya could hear the desperate cries of the survivors as they fought back from the watchtowers, their bullets ringing out in the night, but it wasn't enough. The undead kept coming. Robert and Maya shared a glance, one that spoke volumes. They both knew what had to be done. This wasn't just a fight against the undead, it was a fight for the very survival of their species. They couldn't just hold the compound forever. The gates wouldn't hold much longer. "We need a plan," Maya said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We can't wait for them to break through. We need to take the fight to them." Robert nodded grimly. "Agreed. But we're not leaving until we have a way out. We're not running. Maya's mind raced, trying to think of a solution, but the sounds of the undead's growls and the clatter of their fists against the walls drowned out her thoughts. Her vision blurred with the weight of the situation. What had gone wrong? They thought they had won. They had thought the fight was over. But in dead America, the war against the undead was only just beginning. Robert's voice cut through her panic. Maya, we need a diversion. Something big. I'll lead a small team to the back of the compound. You, get to the front and give us the chance to break through the perimeter. If we don't, then it's over, Maya finished for him. Her breath hitched in her chest. It wasn't a plan that gave her much hope, but it was all they had left. She turned and ran to the front, where the barricades were buckling under the pressure of the undead's assault. The situation had become critical. In the distance, she could see a figure, a lone survivor, but not one of their group. Maya's pulse quickened as she recognized the figure from the day before. He had been scouting the area earlier, but now, something was different. He wasn't alone. There were others with him, zombies, undead, but walking with eerie precision. They weren't just aimless monsters, they were part of something. They're organized, Maya thought, her blood running cold. Robert, she screamed. There's something bigger going on. But it was too late. The plan had been set in motion. They had to go. End of Part 3. Let me know if you'd like to continue with Part 4 or if any adjustments are needed. The chaos of the attack grew more intense with each passing minute. The sounds of the undead crashing against the barricades reverberated through the compound like a relentless drumbeat. Maya's heart raced as she tried to push her thoughts into focus. Focus, she told herself. There was no time for second-guessing. They were in the midst of an all-out war, and every second counted. Robert had already led a small group toward the back of the compound. Maya had seen him signal for them to move, disappearing into the shadows with the others. She had to trust him. They couldn't afford to second-guess anything anymore. Maya gripped her weapon tightly, her knuckles turning white. The ground beneath her feet trembled as another wave of undead slammed against the barricades, their grotesque forms battering the walls. Every now and then, a loud crack would echo through the compound as the reinforced wood splintered under the relentless assault. They're getting stronger, Maya muttered to herself. This isn't just a random horde. They've changed. They've evolved. She took a deep breath, shaking off the dread that threatened to overtake her. She had to stay focused. They had a plan, and it had to work. They had no other choice. In the distance, she saw figures, human survivors, running for the gates, desperate to get inside. But the undead were already closing in on them. The survivors had no chance. They were too far from the gate, and the undead were far too fast now. Maya's stomach twisted as she saw one of them, a woman, fall to the ground. She screamed, her voice swallowed by the growing noise of the undead. Maya's eyes flicked to the back of the compound, where Robert and his group had disappeared. Her heart clenched. Was he okay? Were they okay? Just then, a loud crash echoed from the rear of the compound. Maya's head whipped toward the noise. The back wall, the one Robert and his team had been near, had buckled under the pressure. The undead had found a weakness. There was no time to waste. The gates were their last defense. Maya ran to the front, where the barricades were starting to splinter. A look of determination crossed her face as she saw the undead gathering in force just outside the gate. They had to hold. If the undead breached the gates, there would be no escape. A shrill voice came over the radio, crackling with static. It was Robert. His voice sounded strained, like he was shouting over the chaos. Maya, we're in trouble. They're everywhere, faster, stronger, and organized. We need that diversion now. Maya's pulse quickened. She glanced over at the gathering undead outside the gates. There were more than she could count, too many to face head-on. It was too risky to try and fight them off in an open battle. But there was one thing they could still do. Understood, Maya replied into the radio. I'm moving out. Get ready. Maya turned to the rest of the survivors, who were standing behind the last line of defense. The fear in their eyes was palpable, but she saw something else there too: determination. They had been through hell together, and they weren't about to give up now. "We're going to make a break for it," Maya announced, her voice firm and unwavering. "I need a volunteer to take the northern watchtower. We'll need to create a diversion to draw their attention away from Robert's team." One of the survivors, a tall man named Dean, stepped forward. His face was a mask of grim resolve. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "Good," Maya said. "Once you're up there, use the flare gun. Aim for the southern perimeter, over there, near the old market. If we can get the undead to focus on that, we'll have a chance." Dean nodded and turned to climb the nearest ladder, disappearing into the shadows. Maya's heart raced, but she couldn't afford to let fear take over. Not now. Not when there was still hope. She checked the rest of the group. People were in position, weapons ready, eyes wide with uncertainty. But the fear had given way to determination. They weren't going down without a fight. Maya took a deep breath and turned to the barricades. The undead were growing closer, their movements quickening as they learned the layout of the compound. It was only a matter of time before they figured out how to breach the walls completely. As she scanned the area, her eyes caught something in the distance. A lone figure, an undead, but this one wasn't moving like the others. It was tall, with a strange gait, as though it wasn't entirely a part of the horde. Maya's blood ran cold. The creature's eyes locked with hers, and she could feel an unsettling chill run down her spine. That wasn't just a zombie. It wasn't human anymore. "Robert," Maya whispered into the radio, her voice shaky. "I think they have a leader. A new kind of undead. One that's different." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, Robert's voice crackled through the radio. "Stay focused. It's not just about the fight anymore. It's about survival." But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The undead weren't just adapting, they were evolving into something far worse. And they were ready for war. End of Part 4. Let me know if you'd like to continue with Part 5 or make any adjustments. The flare gun fired with a loud pop, sending a streak of brilliant red light into the dark sky. Dean, from the northern watchtower, had done his part. The flare arced through the air, landing just outside the southern perimeter, right where Maya had instructed. The blinding red glow illuminated the area, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. For a moment, there was a strange silence, as if the undead were pausing, unsure of what to make of the new signal. Then, the horde shifted. Like a single, monstrous entity, the undead began to move toward the flare. Their eyes locked on the light, their instincts drawn to it as if it were a beacon. The survivors watched, holding their breath as the undead abandoned their assault on the compound's walls, their attention now fully diverted to the flare. "Good," Maya muttered under her breath, watching the undead pour toward the southern perimeter. This was their chance. They had only moments before the horde realized they'd been tricked, before they returned to the compound, angrier and more determined than ever. "We move now," Maya shouted, rallying the survivors. "Everyone, to the south. Get to the trucks. Fast." The survivors scrambled into action, sprinting toward the trucks that had been prepared in case of this moment. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she watched them move, her eyes flicking nervously to the back of the compound, where Robert's team had been working their way toward the entrance. She prayed they had enough time to break free. Dean's flare was working, but it wouldn't last forever. The undead were moving quickly now, and the flare's glow would soon fade. The survivors had to be gone before the horde realized the diversion was a trap. But as they rushed toward the trucks, a chill ran down Maya's spine. The strange undead figure she had seen earlier, the one with the unnatural gait, wasn't with the rest of the horde. It was still watching them from the shadows. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its movements were too calculated, too deliberate. And those eyes, they were intelligent. Too intelligent for a typical zombie. "Robert," Maya called urgently into the radio. "Something's wrong." The undead are changing. They're not just mindless anymore. Robert's voice crackled back, filled with tension. We noticed. We've got one of them here too. It's something different. We'll be ready. Maya wasn't sure what they could do to prepare for this new threat, but there was no time to dwell on it now. The undead leader, the one watching them, was getting closer. Maya motioned for the survivors to hurry. The trucks were almost ready. The engines rumbled to life as survivors piled in, but the atmosphere felt off. Everyone was on edge, glancing over their shoulders as they climbed into the vehicles, half expecting to see the undead swarm over the walls at any moment. Just as the last of the survivors scrambled into the truck, a horrible scream echoed through the compound. It wasn't one of the survivors. It was a shrill, guttural noise, one that sent a wave of terror through Maya. Her eyes darted to the front gate, where the scream had come from. The undead had broken through. It wasn't the Horde. It was him. The strange undead leader had broken away from the group and was now advancing toward the compound, his movements smooth and calculated, like a predator. His eyes were locked on Maya as he walked with purpose, his grotesque form casting a long shadow across the ground. That's him, Maya whispered, her voice thick with dread. That's the one I saw before. The survivors in the truck grew quiet, fear settling over them like a thick blanket. They had seen it too, the figure in the distance, moving with an eerie intelligence, as if it were leading the Horde. Robert's voice crackled through the radio again, but it was barely audible. Maya, we can't hold them off much longer. You need to move now. But Maya didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the undead leader, who was now closing in on the compound, the Horde behind him like a tide waiting to crash. There was something in his gaze that made her blood run cold, something not of the undead. It was as if the creature was aware, and that realization hit her with the force of a hammer. They were evolving, she thought again. The undead were learning. They were growing smarter. Maya, you have to go. Robert urged again, his voice frantic. We can't stop this. Not now. The truck roared to life, and Maya snapped her attention back to the survivors. Get moving, she shouted. Don't stop for anything. The trucks lurched forward, pulling away from the compound. Maya looked over her shoulder as the distant, red flare continued to burn in the night sky. The undead were still swarming toward it. But the figure, the leader, wasn't watching the flare anymore. He was staring straight at them, his eyes burning with an unsettling intelligence. Maya's stomach twisted as the truth began to settle in. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for humanity's future. And the undead were no longer just a mindless enemy. They were evolving into something far worse. End of Part 5. Would you like to continue with Part 6 or make any adjustments? The truck's engine roared as it sped down the desolate road, leaving the compound, and the horrors within, far behind. Maya kept her eyes focused straight ahead, but she couldn't shake the images of what had just transpired. The undead leader, with its strange, calculated movements and unnerving intelligence, was still etched into her mind. We need to talk about what just happened, Maya said, her voice hoarse as she looked over at the survivors packed into the back of the truck. They all wore similar expressions, fear, confusion, and uncertainty. Dean, who had fired the flare, spoke up first. His brow was furrowed as he wiped his face with the back of his hand. Those things, they weren't like the others. That leader, he knew we were trying to escape. It wasn't just instinct anymore. It was like he was directing the others. Maya nodded grimly. She had seen it too, the way the leader had moved, the way it had locked eyes with her, as if it could understand. We're not dealing with mindless zombies anymore, she said quietly. They're adapting. Evolving. As the truck rumbled forward, the silence in the air felt oppressive. Everyone knew that the worst was still ahead of them, but no one was sure how to deal with what they had seen. They had all grown accustomed to the relentless hordes of undead, but this was different. The creatures weren't just mindless feeders anymore, they were becoming something more sinister, something more dangerous. Robert, who had been in the truck behind Maya's, caught up alongside her and waved for her attention. He drove a battered SUV, his face drawn with exhaustion. He signaled for her to pull over, and after a few tense moments, Maya did, slowing the truck to a halt in the middle of the cracked highway. The survivors jumped out, gathering around the vehicles as Robert approached with urgency. His face was grim, his usually calm demeanor now replaced by visible stress. "We can't keep running like this," Robert said, his voice low and serious. "We have to find out more about what's happening. We need to know how the undead are changing, and why. If we don't understand what we're up against, we're never going to make it." Maya met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. She had been hoping for some time now that maybe they could just survive long enough to escape, find safety. But this new threat was unlike anything they had ever faced. They couldn't just run from it. Not anymore. "The leader, the one I saw before," Maya said, her voice tight. "It's not just leading the others, Robert. It's evolving. I saw it in its eyes. It knows." Robert's expression darkened. "We're dealing with more than a simple infection now. If these things can think, if they can plan, they won't stop until they've wiped us out. We have to act fast before they figure out how to spread this new intelligence." A chill ran down Maya's spine. She had always known the undead were dangerous, but this was a whole new level. She had to admit, she was terrified. But there was no time for fear. They couldn't afford to let the enemy evolve faster than they could adapt. "We need to find a place to hole up," Maya said firmly. "We need more intel. And we need a plan. Whatever this is, it's changing the game." The group agreed, and after a few moments of tense silence, Robert spoke again. "There's an old research facility a few miles up the road. I don't know much about it, but it's still standing. It might have information we can use. If we're lucky, we can learn something about how to stop this evolution." Maya's mind raced. A research facility? That could be exactly what they needed: data, research, any information that could help them fight back against this new kind of threat. It was a chance, and they had to take it. "All right, let's move out," Maya ordered, her voice resolute. "We don't have much time." As the group gathered their things and prepared to move out, Maya glanced back at the horizon. The flare she had seen earlier was still burning faintly in the distance, the glow casting an eerie light across the barren landscape. The undead had been drawn to it, but she couldn't help but feel that this was all part of something bigger. They had barely escaped the compound, but what lay ahead was the unknown. And the thought of the undead leader, watching, waiting, kept haunting her. That thing was no longer just a monster. It was a symbol of something darker. The evolution of the undead wasn't just a random change, it was a strategy. The Horde wasn't aimless anymore. It was controlled. And it was growing stronger every day. Maya pulled herself out of her thoughts as she climbed into the truck once more. The others followed suit, climbing into their respective vehicles, their faces set with grim determination. The trucks roared to life once more, and they headed for the facility, hoping, praying, that they would find answers before the undead found them. But deep down, Maya knew the truth: answers were only the beginning. The real fight had only just begun. End of Part 6. Would you like to continue with Part 7, or would you like any adjustments to this part? The old research facility loomed ahead like a sleeping giant in the wilderness, its steel doors rusted and its windows darkened with grime. Vines had begun crawling up the concrete walls, and pieces of its roof had collapsed under years of neglect. Still, the structure stood firm, a remnant of a world before dead America fell. Maya signaled the vehicles to stop just outside the perimeter fence. The chain link was mostly intact, but a gaping hole near the far end allowed them a quiet entrance. The group stepped out cautiously, scanning the perimeter. No undead in sight, for now. "Keep it quiet," Maya whispered, drawing her weapon. "We go in slow, search for anything we can use. Data, maps, files, anything." Robert nodded, clutching a flashlight and a crowbar. Behind him, Dean and two other survivors brought up the rear, weapons raised. The silence around them was heavy. Even the wind had stopped. As they entered the main facility, the smell hit them first: mold, rot, and something faintly metallic. The lobby was trashed, overturned desks, broken glass, and old bloodstains covered the floor. But there were no bodies. Not even bones. This place wasn't overrun, Robert murmured. It was abandoned, carefully. Maya spotted a shattered security panel and tapped at it. The system was long dead, but a few lights blinked weakly behind it. Backup power? They moved deeper into the facility, flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. The hallways were narrow, lined with reinforced doors labeled with cryptic names: Biospecimen Lab, Containment Sector A, Observation Bay. Then they found it, a control room half buried in debris. Computers, monitors, and thick files lay scattered across the floor. One screen was flickering faintly. Dean knelt by a terminal and tapped at it. To everyone's surprise, it powered on. An old boot menu flashed before their eyes. Static crackled over the speaker before a voice log began to play. Log number 97, Dr. Evans speaking. The mutation strain has exceeded expectations. The original viral host has adapted beyond cognitive decay. We've observed pattern recognition, emotional mimicry, and now, leadership behaviors. They're not just evolving. They're organizing. Maya and Robert exchanged a stunned look. The undead leader. They had seen it with their own eyes. The log continued. We thought we could contain it. But now, even the others are beginning to follow it. Some display awareness. They avoid traps. They test weaknesses. This isn't a virus anymore. It's an intelligence. Dean scrolled through the logs, eyes wide. Dozens of entries, some corrupted, others still accessible. This place was experimenting on the infected, Maya whispered. Trying to control or study them. Maybe even weaponize them. And they created something worse, Robert added, his voice grim. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hallway behind them. Everyone spun around. Movement, back toward the entrance. Dean shouted, grabbing his rifle. A figure staggered into view. But it wasn't a zombie, it was a man. Bloodied, limping, and holding something wrapped in cloth. The group raised their weapons anyway. Don't shoot, he croaked. I'm human, please. They rushed to him and caught him before he collapsed. Maya pulled the cloth aside. He had something in his hand, a hard drive. They're coming, he gasped. They know you're here, they watch the old networks, that flare you used, it signaled them. He passed out. What did he mean? Someone asked. Dean looked at the screens. The undead, they're using leftover surveillance systems. Anything still functional. Cameras, sensors. Even motion detectors. They're not just hunting anymore, Maya said. They're tracking us. The hard drive the man had carried pulsed with a faint light. Robert held it up. We need to get this decrypted. Whatever's on here, they were trying to get it out. He risked everything to bring it to us. Suddenly, the hallway alarms lit up. A soft red glow bathed the walls as a robotic voice whispered, perimeter breach detected. Lifeforms approaching. Too late, Maya muttered. We've been found. Dean pulled the blackout shutters closed, plunging the lab into darkness. The group crouched low, weapons ready. Outside, through the cracked walls and shattered windows, they could hear it, the dragging of feet, the low hiss of breath, and the unmistakable sound of dozens, maybe hundreds, of infected closing in. But this time, it wasn't just another swarm. These undead weren't mindless. They were hunting with purpose. And leading them was something far worse than any of them had faced before. Maya looked at the group and gritted her teeth. We hold them off long enough to get that hard drive decrypted. Whatever they're afraid of being discovered, that's what we need. As the undead reached the doors and began to pound, screech, and tear, the survivors prepared themselves. The war wasn't over. In dead America, it was just beginning. End of Part 7. Shall I continue with Part 8, the final showdown and conclusion? The lab walls shook as the undead slammed into the facility from all sides. The rhythmic pounding echoed through the corridors like a heartbeat, slow, powerful, relentless. Inside the darkened control room, Maya clenched her jaw, her rifle raised. Everyone was in position. Dean worked frantically on the old computer, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Decrypting now," he muttered. "Almost there." Robert and 2 others had barricaded the entrance with metal cabinets and overturned desks, but they all knew it wouldn't hold for long. Whatever intelligence led these creatures, it was precise, calculated. They weren't just attacking, they were surrounding. The injured man, Lucas, still lay unconscious beside the terminal. The hard drive he had smuggled and now whirred quietly as its contents began to unlock. Maya crouched beside him, checking his pulse. "He's stable," she said. "But we don't have time." From the darkness beyond the hallway came a chilling sound, not the usual groans of the infected, but whispers. A low, breathy chorus, almost chanting. And then, a voice, calm, slow, and horribly clear. "You've seen too much." Maya's eyes widened. "Was that?" Dean stopped typing. "That came through the speakers." "No," Robert said grimly, "that came through everything." The monitors in the room flickered. A blurry image appeared, a silhouette. Human-shaped, but slightly off. Its skin was pale, its eyes dark and deep. Around its neck hung remnants of what looked like military tags. It was the leader. The one they'd seen before. The one they now knew had evolved. The voice returned. "You could have joined us. But now, you'll burn with the rest of them." Suddenly, the facility's lights exploded to life as backup generators kicked in. Alarms blared. The infected began smashing through the outer doors. Dean yelled, "I've got the data. Uploading it to the cloud link. Get it out now." Maya shouted. But the upload bar moved painfully slow, 20%. 35%. Then the hallway door burst open. The first wave poured in, faster, smarter, deadlier. These weren't the shambling corpses they once knew. They moved with coordination, working as a unit. Some carried crude weapons. Others flanked the barricades. Gunfire erupted. Maya and Robert fought side by side, taking down the first few attackers with sharp, surgical precision. Dean covered the computer, firing between keystrokes. The infected kept coming. Suddenly, one of them leapt onto the ceiling, crawling like a spider before dropping down behind the group. It tackled one of the survivors, screams echoed as Maya turned and shot it clean through the head. "We're losing ground," Robert shouted. "We just need 1 minute." Dean yelled. The upload bar crept higher, 70%. 80%. More infected entered. Then, it came. The leader stepped into the hallway. It didn't run. It walked, calmly, confidently, as though it knew victory was certain. Its eyes met Maya's through the firelight and muzzle flashes. It raised one hand, and the infected stopped. They surrounded the group, waiting. Maya realized what was happening. "It's not just fighting us," she said. "It's studying us. Learning how we react. It wants to understand us before it ends us." Dean screamed, "Uploaded. It's out. Everything's out." Maya wasted no time. "Good. Now blow the place." Robert grabbed the makeshift charges they had brought in as a precaution. He punched the timer and looked at the others. 30 seconds. "We have to move, now." They grabbed Lucas and ran, guns blazing. The undead swarmed behind them, but with the leader focused on the data loss, they were slower to react. The team burst out of the facility just as the countdown reached 0. A deafening explosion tore through the night sky, sending fire, dust, and shattered steel flying in all directions. The ground trembled. The shockwave knocked them off their feet. Then, silence. Smoke rose from the ruins of the lab. The facility, the infected, and their terrifying leader, gone. Maya sat up, blood on her cheek, dirt in her lungs. She looked around. Dean, Robert, and the others were alive, bruised but breathing. Lucas groaned and opened his eyes. "You made it," he whispered. Maya nodded. "We all made it." Later, as dawn broke across the broken land, the group stood overlooking the valley. The data had reached the Northern Resistance outpost. The truth was out, the virus wasn't just a disease, it was an evolving force, one with a goal. But now humanity knew. And that changed everything. Dead America was still a battleground. The undead weren't finished. But thanks to Maya's team, the war had shifted. Hope wasn't dead. It had just begun to fight back. The end. Story complete, 8 parts. Let me know if you'd like a new title started.